What happens when one of Britain's most beloved actors walks into a morning talk show expecting a friendly chat, only to be blindsided by a host who seems determined to humiliate him on live television? It only took 30 seconds of airtime for the entire interview to spiral into one of the most jaw-dropping clashes ever broadcast on daytime TV. This is the story of how Hugh Grant found himself in the middle of a verbal war zone on the Lorraine Kelly show, facing not just the host herself, but an entire panel seemingly hell-bent on tearing him down. The morning started like any other. Hugh Grant arrived at the studio to promote his latest film project. He'd done hundreds of these interviews over the years. Smile, answer a few questions, share a funny anecdote, promote the movie, and leave. Simple, easy, routine. But from the moment he sat down on that bright orange sofa, something felt different. The energy was off. Lorraine Kelly greeted him with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes, and the two panelists sitting beside her, morning show regular Janet Street Porter and entertainment correspondent Ross King, exchanged glances that Hugh couldn't quite read. "So, Hugh," Lorraine began, leaning forward with an intensity that immediately put him on edge. "Let's talk about your new film. Another romantic comedy. Tell me, do you ever get tired of playing the same character over and over again?" The studio went quiet. It wasn't the question itself. It was the delivery, the slight sneer in her voice, the way she emphasized the word same as if it were an insult. Hugh shifted in his seat, maintaining his composure. "Well, I wouldn't say I play the same character. Each role has its own nuances, and—" "Oh, come on," Lorraine interrupted, waving her hand dismissively. "The awkward British man who stumbles his way into love. We've seen it a dozen times, haven't we?" She turned to her panel, seeking validation. Janet Street Porter jumped in immediately. "I have to say, Lorraine makes a good point. Hugh, your career does seem rather, shall we say, predictable?" Hugh's jaw tightened slightly, but he kept his tone measured. "I think audiences connect with authenticity. If people enjoy the films, then I'm doing something right." "Are they, though?" Lorraine shot back. "Your last 3 films have had rather disappointing box office numbers. Maybe audiences are tired of the same old Hugh Grant act." Ross King leaned in, piling on. "The reviews haven't been particularly kind either, have they? I read one that called your latest performance phoned in." Hugh took a breath, clearly trying to remain professional. Every actor has films that perform differently. The important thing is that we're telling stories that matter to us. "Stories that matter?" Lorraine's voice dripped with condescension. "Hugh, you're making fluffy romantic comedies. Not exactly changing the world, are we?" The audience shifted uncomfortably in their seats. This wasn't the light-hearted morning show banter they'd expected. This was something else entirely. Something hostile. "I think entertainment has value," Hugh replied, his voice steady, but with an edge creeping in. "Not every film needs to be a heavy drama to be worthwhile." "But surely you must admit," Janet interjected, "that at your age, isn't it a bit embarrassing to still be playing the charming bumbler? You're not exactly a young man anymore." The comment hung in the air like a grenade waiting to explode. Hugh's expression hardened. "I'm sorry, what does my age have to do with anything?" he asked, the politeness in his voice now clearly strained. Lorraine jumped back in, sensing blood in the water. "Well, Hugh, let's be honest. You're in your 60s now. Don't you think it's a bit cringeworthy watching you chase after women half your age in these films? It's not exactly appropriate, is it?" Hugh's face flushed. "My characters are age-appropriate relationships. The actresses I work with are adults, and the relationships depicted are between consenting adults." "But it's all a bit creepy, though, isn't it?" Ross added, nodding along with Lorraine. "The older man, the younger woman. It's a tired trope, and frankly, it's uncomfortable to watch." "I think you're deliberately mischaracterizing my work," Hugh said, his voice rising slightly. "And I have to say, this feels less like an interview and more like an ambush." Lorraine laughed, but it was cold and performative. "Oh, Hugh, don't be so sensitive. We're just having an honest conversation. Surely you can handle a bit of criticism?" "There's criticism, and then there's this," Hugh replied. "You've insulted my work, my age, and now you're implying something rather disturbing about the nature of my films. This isn't journalism. I don't even know what this is." Janet Street Porter leaned forward, her voice sharp. "Maybe it's accountability, Hugh. Maybe it's time someone asked you the hard questions, instead of letting you coast by on your pretty boy charm, which, let's face it, isn't what it used to be." The audience gasped. Someone in the front row actually said, "Oh my God," loud enough to be heard. Hugh's composure was cracking. "That's incredibly rude." "Is it rude or is it true?" Lorraine pressed. "Come on, Hugh. You've made a career out of being the handsome leading man, but time catches up with all of us. Maybe it's time to accept that your moment has passed." "Lorraine, I came here to talk about a film," Hugh said, his voice now tight with barely controlled anger. "A film that a lot of talented people worked very hard on. I didn't come here to be attacked by you and your panel." "Attacked?" Lorraine scoffed. "Hugh, this is what happens in the real world. People ask difficult questions. If you can't handle it, maybe you're in the wrong business." Ross King chimed in again. "And let's talk about your personal life, Hugh. Your history with relationships is, shall we say, checkered? How do you expect audiences to believe you as a romantic lead when your real life is such a mess?" That was the line, the one that shouldn't have been crossed. Hugh stood up from the sofa, pulling off his microphone. "That's absolutely none of your business." "Oh, sit down, Hugh," Lorraine said dismissively. "You're being ridiculous." "No," Hugh said firmly. "I'm not doing this. This isn't an interview. This is you trying to make yourself feel important by tearing someone else down." The studio fell completely silent. Camera operators didn't know where to point. The director in the control room was frantically trying to figure out how to handle what was unfolding live on air. "Excuse me?" Lorraine's voice went up an octave. "How dare you?" "How dare I?" Hugh interrupted. "How dare you? I've been nothing but professional since I walked in here, and you've done nothing but attack me. My work, my age, my personal life. What gives you the right?" Janet Street Porter tried to interject. "Hugh, you're overreacting." "I'm overreacting?" Hugh turned to her. "You called me creepy. You said my charm isn't what it used to be. You've been sitting here smugly nodding along while Lorraine tears me apart. And for what? Ratings? To feel superior?" Lorraine stood up now, her face red. "I will not be spoken to like this on my own show." "Then maybe you should think twice before you speak to your guests the way you've spoken to me," Hugh shot back. "You've been unbelievably disrespectful. And the worst part is, you seem to think you're entitled to it." "I am entitled to ask whatever questions I want," Lorraine snapped. "This is my show." "And I'm entitled to walk off when those questions cross a line," Hugh replied. "Which they did about 5 minutes ago." Ross King, trying to play peacemaker but failing miserably, spoke up. "Hugh, mate, let's all just calm down and—" "Don't mate me," Hugh cut him off. "You've been just as bad as they have, sitting there with your smug little comments, piling on. This isn't journalism. This is bullying." The word hung in the air. Bullying. On daytime television. Live. Lorraine's expression shifted from anger to something defensive. "That's a very serious accusation, Hugh. And it's an accurate one," Hugh said, his voice steady now, controlled. "You brought me on this show under the pretense of promoting a film, and instead, you've used this platform to attack me personally. You've questioned my talent, my relevance, my personal life, and you've done it with this air of superiority that's frankly disgusting." "I think you need to leave," Lorraine said coldly. "Oh, I'm already leaving," Hugh replied, already moving toward the edge of the set. "But let me be clear. This isn't me being difficult. This isn't me being unable to handle criticism. This is me refusing to sit here and be disrespected by someone who clearly has some sort of personal issue with me. Personal issue? Lorraine laughed incredulously. I don't have a personal issue with you, Hugh. I just think your work is subpar and your time is up. Hugh stopped and turned back. And you felt the need to say that on television? To humiliate me in front of millions of people? What does that say about you, Lorraine? The question was rhetorical, but it hit its mark. For the first time since the interview started, Lorraine seemed momentarily at a loss for words. Janet Street Porter, sensing her host needed backup, jumped in. Hugh, I think you're being far too sensitive about this. Sensitive? Hugh repeated. I'm standing up for myself. There's a difference. And frankly, I think the fact that you all seem to think this behavior is acceptable says a lot about what's wrong with this industry. What's wrong with this industry? Ross King asked, clearly offended. Yes, Hugh said firmly. The casual cruelty, the need to tear people down for entertainment, the complete lack of basic human decency. You've all sat here and attacked me, and you seem genuinely confused as to why I'm upset about it? Lorraine found her voice again. You're a public figure, Hugh. You're fair game. Being a public figure doesn't mean I'm not a person, Hugh replied. It doesn't mean I deserve to be treated like this. And it certainly doesn't give you the right to say whatever you want without consequences. Consequences? Lorraine's voice was rising again. Are you threatening me? I'm not threatening anyone, Hugh said, exasperated. I'm simply saying that actions have consequences. You've been incredibly rude. You've insulted me repeatedly. And now you're acting like I'm the problem for calling it out. The audience was completely transfixed. Some people were recording on their phones. Others sat with their mouths open, unable to believe what they were witnessing. Janet Street Porter, never one to back down, pressed forward. Hugh, if you can't handle a tough interview, maybe you shouldn't do them. This isn't a tough interview, Hugh said, his patience clearly exhausted. A tough interview asks challenging questions about work, about choices, about craft. This has been personal attacks disguised as journalism. There's a difference, and you know it. I think you're being dramatic, Ross said. Dramatic. Hugh's voice carried a note of disbelief. You've questioned my relevance as an actor, implied that my relationships on screen are inappropriate, brought up my personal life, and told me I'm past my prime. On live television. And I'm being dramatic for objecting to it? Lorraine stepped forward, trying to regain control. Hugh, if you would just sit back down, we can... No, Hugh said simply. I'm not giving you the opportunity to continue this. I'm leaving. You're making a huge mistake. Lorraine warned. Walking off a show like this, it doesn't look good. Hugh laughed, but there was no humor in it. Doesn't look good? Lorraine, do you have any self-awareness at all? Do you genuinely not see how you've behaved here? I've asked legitimate questions, she insisted. You've attacked me, Hugh corrected, and you've done it with this air of righteousness, like you're doing some sort of public service. But all you're doing is being cruel. Janet Street Porter shook her head. I think someone can't handle the truth about their fading career. That was it. That was the final straw. Hugh turned to look directly at Janet. You know what? I've been in this industry for over 30 years. I've had highs and lows like everyone else. But I've always tried to treat people with respect. I've never used my platform to deliberately hurt someone. And looking at you three, I can honestly say I'm proud of that. Because whatever you think of my work, at least I'm not sitting here trying to make myself feel better by tearing someone else down. The words landed like punches. Janet's face went red. Ross looked away, and Lorraine, for just a moment, seemed to falter. But she recovered quickly, her voice icy. Get off my set. Already gone, Hugh said, and he walked toward the exit. As he reached the edge of the studio, Lorraine called after him, "You'll never work on this network again." Hugh stopped, turned one last time, and said, "Good." And then he was gone. The studio sat in stunned silence. Lorraine looked at her panel, then at the cameras, then at the audience. She tried to laugh it off, to make some quip about actors and their egos, but it fell flat. The audience wasn't laughing. They weren't even smiling. Someone in the front row started clapping. Just one person. Then another. Then another. Within seconds, a significant portion of the audience was applauding. Not for Lorraine, for Hugh, for standing up for himself, for refusing to be treated poorly. Lorraine's face went from red to pale. She looked betrayed, confused, angry. How had this happened? This was her show, her territory. She was supposed to be in control. "Well," she said, trying to regain composure, "that was certainly unexpected." Janet Street Porter tried to help. Some people just can't handle honest discourse. But even she sounded uncertain now. The energy in the room had shifted completely. Ross King looked uncomfortable. "Perhaps we should take a break." The director in the control room was already making that call. The cameras cut away, but not before capturing Lorraine's face. A mixture of anger, confusion, and something that looked a lot like the dawning realization that this hadn't gone the way she'd planned. In the dressing room backstage, Hugh was gathering his things. A production assistant knocked timidly on the door. "Mr. Grant, are you okay?" Hugh looked up and managed a small smile. "I'm fine, thank you. Just disappointed." "That was really unfair," the assistant said quietly. "What they did to you. Everyone back here is talking about it. It wasn't right." "Thank you," Hugh said sincerely. "I appreciate that." As he left the building, Hugh could hear the chaos erupting behind him. Producers arguing, Lorraine defending herself, the panic of a show that had just imploded on live television. But Hugh didn't look back. He'd said what needed to be said. He'd stood up for himself when 3 people had tried to tear him down, and he'd done it with as much grace as possible under the circumstances. The story spread like wildfire. Within minutes, clips were online. Social media exploded, and the overwhelming consensus was clear. Hugh Grant hadn't been difficult. He hadn't been oversensitive. He'd been a guest who was treated appallingly, and who had the courage to call it out. Back in the studio, as they returned from commercial break, Lorraine tried to continue the show as if nothing had happened. But something had changed. The audience was cold. The energy was off. And deep down, she knew it. She'd brought Hugh Grant onto her show expecting to score easy points, to look tough and uncompromising. Instead, she'd revealed something about herself that no amount of damage control could fix. The interview that was supposed to last 15 minutes had lasted barely 8 before it fell apart completely. 8 minutes that would be replayed, analyzed, and discussed for years to come. 8 minutes where a host forgot that her guests were human beings deserving of respect. Where a panel thought cruelty was the same as honesty. Where entertainment crossed the line into something darker. And 8 minutes where Hugh Grant reminded everyone watching that sometimes the right thing to do is simply to walk away. As the show limped toward its conclusion, Janet Street Porter tried to justify their approach. "We were just being honest," she insisted to the camera, but the audience knew better. They'd watched something uncomfortable unfold. They'd seen a man attacked for no good reason, and they'd seen him handle it with more dignity than the people attacking him. In the control room, the producer was already on the phone with network executives. Damage control was beginning. Statements would need to be prepared, apologies considered, though whether they'd actually be issued was another matter entirely. Lorraine finished the show with her usual sign-off, but her smile was strained. The confidence she'd had at the beginning, that sense of control and power, had evaporated. She'd wanted to make Hugh Grant look bad, to diminish him, to show that she was the one in charge. Instead, she'd shown her audience exactly who she was. And sometimes, that's the most revealing thing of all. The credits rolled, the audience filed out, many of them still talking about what they'd witnessed. The set lights dimmed, and somewhere in London, Hugh Grant was already moving on with his day, knowing he'd done the right thing. The interview was over, but its impact was just beginning. Not because of what was said, but because of how it was said. Not because of the questions asked, but because of the malice behind them. 3 people had sat on a sofa and decided that tearing someone down would make for good television. One person had refused to accept that treatment, and in the end, that made all the difference. The show would go on. Lorraine would return tomorrow with new guests and new segments, but everyone who watched that morning would remember what happened. They'd remember the cruelty, the smugness, the complete lack of empathy, and they'd remember Hugh Grant, standing up and saying simply but powerfully, "No, I'm not doing this." Sometimes that's all it takes. One person refusing to accept unacceptable behavior. One person drawing a line and walking away when it's crossed. The cameras were off now. The studio was quiet. But the moment itself would live on, a reminder that fame doesn't erase humanity, and that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is refuse to play along with people who want to tear you down. Hugh Grant had come to promote a film. He'd left having stood up for something more important: his dignity, his self-respect, his refusal to be treated as anything less than a person deserving of basic courtesy. And Lorraine Kelly, Janet Street Porter, and Ross King had revealed themselves in ways they likely hadn't intended. Not as tough interviewers asking hard questions, but as people who mistook cruelty for courage and attacks for journalism. The orange sofa sat empty now, a silent witness to what had unfolded. Tomorrow there would be new guests, new conversations, new moments. But this morning, this particular morning, would be remembered. Not for what was promoted, not for any planned segment or carefully crafted question, but for the moment when a guest said enough and walked away with his head held high, leaving behind 3 people who had forgotten that being on television doesn't give you the right to forget basic human decency. The show was over. The interview was done. But the lesson for anyone paying attention was clear as day. Treat people with respect. Ask tough questions, but don't attack. Challenge, but don't demean. And if you can't do that, don't be surprised when people refuse to sit there and take it. Hugh Grant learned something that morning too, that sometimes walking away is the strongest statement you can make. That dignity isn't about staying and enduring mistreatment. It's about knowing when enough is enough and having the courage to act on it. As the building emptied and the day moved on, one truth remained. 3 people had tried to make themselves look powerful by diminishing someone else. And one person had shown them that real power comes from treating others well and refusing to accept anything less for yourself. The clash was over. The moment had passed, but its resonance would continue. A reminder that we all have choices in how we treat each other, and that those choices reveal who we truly are.